The time is at hand.
The Army Air Forces has announced that a flying disc has been found and is now in the possession of the Army.
When we are successful, and we will be, we have a real chance at this new world order.
One of the many spirits said to haunt the area.
Unknown animal attack.
We need a great reset.
Babylon the Great is fallen, is fallen.
Welcome to In Dark Places. My name is Junebug Fugit. Howdy. This week on the show, aliens. I've got stories about little alien moth babies, alien deer hunters, abductions, all kinds of good stuff. Right after the news. This story was sent in by our news correspondent, Paul Chadwick. Thanks, Paul. Lancashire police open their X-Files and share reports of UFOs in Preston, Blackpool, Blackmore, Burnley, Corley, and Morecambe. By Matthew Calderbank. Thanks, Matthew. Sightings of unidentified objects in the sky have been reported to police forces around the world for years, including Lancashire, where police have investigated 10 reports in the last 3 years. Since 2020, Lancashire police have received a total of 10 reports from people who claim to have witnessed strange activity in our skies, but sometimes these calls are not what they may seem. From bright lights in the sky to aliens living next door to a startling report of a craft crashing in Blackburn. The police logs have tales to tell, and some are out of this world. We asked the Lancashire police to crack open their X-Files, and this is what they revealed. In 2020, the force received 4 reports, 2 in Blackburn, 1 in Burnley, and 1 in Blackpool, with 1 person arrested following an investigation. In Blackburn, a person reporting aliens in the sky. Blackburn, a person having paranoid delusions and seeing aliens. Blackpool, report of a bright light in the sky. Burnley, report of lights in the sky. In 2021, Preston, person suffering hallucinations and believing it was UFOs. Blackpool, person reported UFO sighting and then hung up. Morecambe, report of UFOs in the sky. 2022, Cornwall, person having hallucinations and seeing aliens. Preston, report of alien living next door. Blackburn, report of a UFO that has crashed and then the person hung up. How do Lancashire police respond to UFO reports? A police spokesman said, "With any call received into the police force control room, the operator assesses each and identifies any risk, threat, or harm, and the operator provides the appropriate response to this, which may include deploying an officer." Sometimes these calls are not what they may seem, so a call reporting a potential UFO could be a suspicious light or suspicious movement that could mean any number of things, and we would assess and deploy officers if required, or give suitable advice, or there could be a concern for the caller's welfare. We seem to be having some trouble with our satellite feed. We've lost our police spokesperson. And now, here is the Nicolas Cage Meltdown of the Week. there's another synchronicity. I didn't plan that. That was from Nicolas Cage's Alien movie, Color Out of Space. Strange movie. But how funny is that, though? It's about aliens. In March 1971, Brian Scott and a friend who wishes to be known as Eric Wilson, so please let's respect his wishes, were camping in the Arizona desert. One evening around 9 p.m. they saw a brilliant object hovering in the sky some 5 miles away. It was oval-shaped and dark, but there was a bright haze around it and a brilliant purple light beneath it. Despite its distance, Scott pointed his flashlight at it, whereupon it began to approach them. When the object was overhead, it was so huge that it almost completely blocked out the sky, hovering over them at a height of some 200 feet and bathing them in purple light. They could see no windows, doors, or other details of conventional aircraft. Scott remembered nothing more till they were in the car going toward home, but a time signal on his car radio revealed that it was 11 p.m. 2 hours had elapsed, which neither of them could recall. Some 4 years later, when Scott was 32 years old, he told a colleague of the experience and followed his suggestion to report it to UFO researchers. Their investigation led to a hypnosis session in the hope that it would help him to recall additional details. Under hypnosis, Scott said that he and Wilson had been taken into the UFO, where tall, ugly entities with 3-fingered hands had forced them to submit to a physical examination. The alien leader had been distant but not unfriendly. He said he came from another world beyond all time, through years of light years. He told Scott, "When I return, all will know the truth. Life will be lived through all time, and knowledge will all be yours. I am now, I was, and always will be." In addition to these somewhat vague statements, Scott reported more specific predictions as to Earth's future, including the complete annihilation of the Western Hemisphere from an easterly direction and involving bombs of high magnitude. But a few thousand persons are to be saved and taken to another plane of existence. This will occur on December 24th, 2011. You guys remember that? I seem to have missed it. Wilson did not corroborate Scott's account. In fact, he was reluctant to even admit that he had sighted a UFO, let alone that he had been abducted. Asked if he thought it was possible that Scott had invented the whole affair, he said it was. Eventually, Eric Wilson allowed himself to be hypnotized, but it did not affect his story. The story was sent in by our friend Tim. Thanks, Tim. Man from Wyoming traveled 163,000 light years from Earth with alien named Oso 1 by Vicky Verma. Thanks, Vicky. On October 25th, 1974, 41-year-old Carl Higdon, who worked in the oil industry, went hunting for a weekend to the Medicine Bow National Forest in Carbon County, Wyoming. In the book Alien Abductions of the Wyoming Hunter, first-person story of Carl Higdon, Higdon's wife Marjorie wrote that he was an experienced hunter, but he had not yet been to such a forest. It turned out to be a remote and uninhabited area with no signs of human presence. Higdon visited the forest by car, but the roads were not very good, so he walked over a small forested hill. When he was on the other side of the hill, he immediately came across a herd of deer, one of which was a large male with branched antlers. Higdon was about to shoot the deer when something very strange happened. He aimed, fired, but suddenly the shot was completely silent, and the rifle did not recoil. And then Higdon watched in amazement as the bullet from the rifle flew ahead in very slow motion. At such a slow pace, the bullet flew only a few meters, and then fell sharply to the ground, as if it had hit something invisible. And when the hunter looked at this and wondered, he noticed that the whole atmosphere around him became tense, as if filled with static electricity. Higdon went to the bullet to pick it up, and saw that it was flattened as if it had hit something very strong. The deer had already fled by that time, but Higdon was not alone there. He heard a noise from the branches, crunching. When he looked to the right in the shade of the trees, he saw a human figure. The figure was about the size of a tall man, and wore a tight black jumpsuit, similar to a diving suit. He wore a pair of seat belts, and a metal belt with a yellow star decoration at its waist. Despite being human, the creature's head was not at all human. He had no ears, his eyes were small and deep-set, his mouth was an open slit from which 3 large teeth were visible, and 2 short antennae grew from his forehead. The hair on the creature's head was like straw and stood straight up. The creature did not seem to have a neck at all. An eerie head sat directly on its shoulders, merging with the body. The arms were very long. One arm had something like a chisel instead of a wrist at the end, and the other had no wrist at all. The strange entity looked at Higdon for a few minutes, and then took a few steps toward him and asked him in English, "How are you?" The stunned Higdon answered, "Okay," after a few seconds. The creature nodded at that and came even closer. It didn't look threatening, and then asked Higdon if he was hungry. Without waiting for the hunter's response, the creature pulled out a plastic bag from somewhere and sent it through the air as if using telekinetics toward the hunter. He caught the package, opened it somehow, and then found 4 pills inside. The creature said the pills would keep him full for the day. The hunter pulled out one and swallowed it, and put the rest in his pocket. And then the creature finally introduced himself. He said his name was Also One, and then pointed to something behind it. Higdon saw a transparent cube-shaped object that looked like a large box-shaped spaceship. He saw no entrance, no windows, no landing gear. The spaceship just stood on the ground. Also asked Higdon if he wanted to take a ride, and before the hunter could answer, he somehow ended up inside the spaceship, as if he was teleported there. He did not understand how he'd fit in that tiny spaceship, but he was immediately seized by panic when he saw that his arms and legs were tied with some kind of ribbons. When he calmed down a little, he was in a kind of force field in which 5 deer were floating. They were frozen, and he was sure that they were the same deers that he had seen in the clearing. Then he saw another creature from the Osso race in the spaceship. This creature approached the hunter and put a helmet on his head. And then the ship took off, and Higdon could see through the transparent walls how they went up, and there was his car at the bottom of the hill. And then they flew even higher and reached Earth's orbit. And then they flew into deep space, around 163,000 light years away from Earth. They ended up on a new planet where the ship approached a huge tower. Around the tower, many colored lights were revolving like powerful searchlights. They were so bright that Higdon could not open his eyes. What happened next, Higdon hardly remembers. At that point, he saw a group of people outside, but he did not understand why they were there and who they were. And then also told him that his race regularly flies to Earth for hunting. And then the hunter was placed in a room where he was scanned by some kind of device. Also said that the hunter was not suitable for their purpose, and they would bring him back home. They were on Earth as quickly as they flew away from it, before releasing Higdon, also took the package of pills from him, and then wanted to take his gun, but said that he was forbidden to do so. After that, the aliens disappeared, and Higdon found himself in the forest, completely disoriented and frightened. He wandered around until he somehow found some kind of transport, and in some time he realized that it was his car. With the help of the radio, he gave a distress signal, and then sat in the car and shivered, waiting for help. When the search party reached him, it turned out that his car was parked at the bottom of a deep forest canyon, 5 miles from where he left it. There were no roads nearby, and there were no tire tracks in the gorge, so this fact already a good proof of Higdon's words. Higdon did not immediately recognize his wife from the stress he had endured. Later it turned out that in that area, on the eve of the abduction of the hunter, other people saw strange lights in the sky. When Higdon was found, he was so confused he had little to say. He only kept repeating about the bullet which flattened out when struck against something invisible. Most of his memories were obtained through regressive hypnosis, and then a medical examination of the hunter was carried out, and it turned out that the scars left from his long-term tuberculosis disappeared from his lungs, and stones from which he had suffered for a long time disappeared from his kidneys. A flattened bullet was found in the pocket of his jacket, and research showed that it could only get such damage if it hit a very hard surface, harder than wood or stone in the forest. Later, Higdon was repeatedly called a fraud, who supposedly invented all this to become famous. But at least the strange fact of finding his car in a place where it could not be in any way according to the laws of physics shows that this story is real. I've kind of purposely steered away from the Roswell, New Mexico alien UFO crash. I don't know why. I guess there's just been so much said about it that there's not really much else I can add to it. Like most people, that was the first UFO story that I ever heard about. And I went along with the narrative, like how the Air Force said that it was just a weather balloon whenever I first heard it. But then after I heard a couple other UFO stories, I started to realize that it's probably not a weather balloon, and that's a cover story. And then I journeyed into the rabbit hole, and I've been there ever since. But here's one that you might like that's kind of newer. This woman from the U.S. Army claimed to talk to only alien survivor of Roswell UFO crash, by Vicky Verma. Thanks, Vicky. The Roswell incident has always been a core of all aliens and UFO mysteries we have seen in the last several decades. Officially, it was never claimed that the alien craft crashed in New Mexico in 1947, but many people of that time stated to have seen alien craft that day. There are dozens of stories that tell us that aliens were rescued after the crash and possibly survived. It is evident that the government will always deny it. However, some individuals and officials believe the aliens rescue story and said the UFO crash was real. According to the excerpts from the notes and documents of Matilda O'Donnell McElroy, Senior Master Sergeant Women's Army's Air Force Medical Corps, she interviewed an alien named Errol, who told her where they had come from and why they had come to Earth. Matilda was only 23 years old when she interviewed the alien through telepathy. She was the only person at the base who had the ability to talk to the beings through the mind. In her interview with Errol, she found that the alien was not a biological being, had a female-like appearance, and also not been injured during the crash. She noted that the alien was the size of a small child and was the only survivor among the 3 crew members of the ship that had crashed in New Mexico. Her body was made of synthetic material, which means she was an alien robot controlled by the higher order being, according to the book Alien Interview from 2008. so it's not all that new. Which is based on the notes and documented interviews by Matilda O'Donnell McElroy. The UFO was made of the same material as the alien body. It was controlled by the mind and thoughts. The author of the book, Lawrence R. Spencer, claimed to have received a letter from Matilda where she disclosed information about the series of interviews with Errol. She wrote that the Domain Expeditionary Force, a race of beings, had been conducting operations in the solar system for the past 10,000 years and using the asteroid belt as an intergalactic base. Matilda was assigned as the flight nurse of the 509th Bomb Wing. She asked several questions to Errol about her civilization, star system, and history. From their conversation, it was known that Errol had come from a place called Domain. As Matilda described, that place was not just a planet of one galaxy, but a number of galaxies. The alien said that her home, birthplace, was full of power, knowledge, and wisdom. Her planet had 2 stars and 3 moons. Matilda noted that Errol did not give her any information related to her language or the location of her planet. She was uncertain about the intentions of military officers, and that made her refuse to disclose any secret information to humans. The nurse called it a serious sign, because if aliens did not find themselves safe on Earth, then it could become a big problem for humans. Errol called her civilization very powerful, extremely ancient, and above all, their only goal was to progress. In the letter, McElroy wrote, "Mankind needs to know the answers to questions which are contained in the documents. Who are we? Where did we come from? What is our purpose on Earth? If there is intelligent life elsewhere in the universe, why have they not contacted us? It is vital that people understand the devastating consequences to our physical and spiritual survival if we fail to take effective action to undo the long-standing and pervasive effects of alien intervention on Earth." When Matilda asked Errol how long she had been visiting Earth, her answer was, long before humans. In her footnotes, Matilda wrote, "Earth is a small planet of a rim star of a galaxy. This makes Earth very isolated geographically from the more concentrated planetary civilizations which exist toward the center of the galaxy. These obvious facts have made Earth suitable for only as a zoological and botanical garden, or for its current use as a prison, but not much else. Before 30,000 BCE, Earth started being used as a dumping ground and prison for ISBEs, who were judged untouchable, meaning criminal or nonconformists. ISBEs were captured, encapsulated in electronic traps, and transported to Earth from various parts of the old empire. Underground amnesia stations were set up on Mars and on Earth in the Rizoe Mountains in Africa, in the Pyrenees Mountains of Portugal, and in the steppes of Mongolia. Matilda's story sounds a bit like a science fiction movie where she talks about intergalactic travels. In 2009, a short CGI film, The Ex Esma 2008, was released on YouTube by ESMA Movies, in which a playful child alien with deviant behavior was turned into a human and exiled to Earth by ETs after he disturbed the peace on their planet. The video is a strange concept, but somehow it is similar to what Matilda said about Earth as a prison for IBEs, who were sent here encapsulated in electronic traps. This is my favorite story from Unsolved Mysteries, along with all my other favorite stories from Unsolved Mysteries. This one aired on September 18th, 1994. In August of 1976, 4 men, brothers Jack and Jim Weiner, and their friends Chuck Rake and Charlie Foltz, went on a camping trip for 2 weeks in the Allagash Wilderness in Maine. On the second night, Jim noticed a strange bright object in the sky that appeared for about 30 seconds and then vanished. 2 nights later, on August 20th, the men were fishing in a boat when the bright object appeared again. Chuck was the first to notice the object. The men noticed that it was very bright, similar to the sun. Charlie tried to signal SOS to the object. Suddenly, the object shot out a bright light, which began following the men along the water. The men began to paddle back to shore, but the next thing they remembered was being on the shore and the bright light vanishing. The men thought it was strange that the fire that they had set minutes before they went fishing had completely burned out, suggesting that they had been gone for several hours. The men felt very fatigued and went to bed. The 4 men spent 6 more days in the wilderness, but never again saw the bright object. The men told their families and friends about the strange sighting, but nobody believed them. Then, in 1988, Jack and Jim began having strange nightmares about the 4 men sitting on a bench naked and feeling very fearful. Jim decided to contact UFO researcher Ray Fowler in order to help with the strange nightmares. The 4 men decided to go under hypnosis. Each agreed to go separately and not tell the other about what they remembered. They described in frightening detail about how they were abducted and then probed by aliens back in 1976. The aliens apparently took samples of the men's skin and body fluids. Jack remembered that the aliens had terrifying faces. They told him to not be afraid and do what they say. Charlie described the ship as like a doctor's office. He claimed that they put a panel over his chest and scraped skin from his body. Finally, Chuck claimed that he had a good view of what the aliens were doing to Charlie. The device that the aliens used was silver and had curves. To him, it appeared that Charlie was in pain. After the sessions, Ray brought the 4 men together. They learned that each of them recalled the same events. They each took polygraph examinations and passed. However, skeptics, such as Dr. William Cole, are not certain that their stories are true and believe that the strange nightmares and confessions under hypnosis were the result of watching movies and TV shows about aliens. However, the 4 men are certain that what happened to them is real. The Allagash has a population of 277. The wilderness covers thousands of acres in the northernmost part of Maine. Jack and Jim Weiner first met Chuck Rake and Charlie Fultz in high school. UFO researcher Ray Fowler and psychiatrist and author Dr. John Mack both investigated and studied the case of the Allagash abductions. In a 2016 interview, Chuck Rake admitted that the abduction part of the story was made up, and that he went along with the narrative for financial gain. However, he does admit to seeing a series of strange lights over a period of a couple days during the camping trip. So I don't know. I'm curious. Did the brothers actually remember their abduction stories and Chuck Rake just went along with it? Or was the whole thing just made up? I'm very confused now. On the morning of January 4th, 1979, Gene Hingley, a factory worker who lives near Birmingham in the English Midlands, had the strangest experience of her whole life. She says, "At 7 o'clock my husband was going to work by car, and I stood at the back door to wave him off. Hobo, our Alsatian dog, was by my side. When my husband had gone, I saw a light in the garden and thought, Cyril has left the light on in the carport. I went down, but I saw that the light was off. As we turned to go back to the house, I saw an orange light over the garden which gradually turned white. It lit the whole garden. We went into the back door of the house. Suddenly, with a sound like Z, 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 3 beings floated past me through the open door. They glowed with a brilliant light and seemed to float about a foot above the floor. As they floated past me into the lounge, I saw that they had wonderful wings. Describing the wings in detail, she said that they glowed with rainbow colors, so breathtakingly beautiful that they made our earthly colors look chemical. Both Jean Hingley and her dog were overwhelmed by the experience. The dog flopped onto the floor and laid stiff, as if drugged. Mrs. Hingley also felt paralyzed, and then, after a while, the fear seemed to leave her. I felt as if I was lifted up. I seemed to float into the lounge. The three creatures were shaking and tugging at the little Christmas tree. Three little slim men in silvery green tunics and silver waistcoats with silver buttons or press studs. They were about 3 feet 6 inches to 4 feet high, all alike. Their pointed hands and feet were covered in the same silvery green, and they had pointed caps on their heads of the same color, and with something like a lamp on top. They were floating around the lounge, touching everything: the Christmas cards, the clock, the radio, and all the furniture. At last I could speak. I said, "3 of you and 1 of me. What are you going to do? What do you want with me?" A somewhat awkward conversation followed, in the course of which the creatures revealed that they came from the sky. They said that they had visited Australia, New Zealand, and America, and that "we come down here to try to talk to people, but they don't seem to be interested." Although she was very nervous, Jean Hingley did talk to them about her own life, and they seemed interested in whatever she said. She offered them some mince pies, and when they took them, their hands seemed magnetic. And then she started to show them how to smoke, because they seemed curious about her cigarettes, teaching them nasty habits right from the get-go. But they were frightened when she lit one and floated out into the garden. Jean Hingley herself still seemed to be floating as she followed them. They went toward a glowing, orange-colored spaceship sitting in her garden. She estimated it between 8 to 10 feet long and about 4 feet high, with round windows. The creatures still held the mince pies she had given them as they entered the object and closed the door. As the craft lifted, they flashed their lights twice, as if, Mrs. Hingley thought, saying goodbye. And then the object disappeared in the direction of Oldbury. After they had gone, she saw a deep impression in the ground where the spaceship had been, and the packed ice and snow, which had lain for days in the severe winter, had melted away completely. Jean Hingley said that after the beings had left, she felt warm and happy, as though she had been blessed. And that's about all the creepy alien stories I have for you right now. I'll see you again right here next week. God bless. Take care.